Okay, next we're going to talk about Black Power. And this Black Power era and movement is, again, another way and another voice within the civil rights movement. So Rosa Parks is one very important, very powerful example. The Greensboro Four, we've talked about these examples of nonviolent resistance from the late 1950s and into the early 1960s. And while nonviolence continued to be used by many people within the civil rights movement, by the mid-1960s, new voices began to emerge, and in particular led by groups of young people that were actually asking questions based on some of the work of people like Malcolm X about whether or not nonviolence was the only route, or whether or not nonviolence really was the right expectation for African Americans. And so Black Power and the Black Power movement is what we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about. So probably the most prominent example of the Black Power movement and these new ways of looking at the civil rights era that emerged in the mid-1960s is the Black Panther Party. Now, the Black Panthers are lots of people have heard of the Black Panthers. They're in the news on occasion, and in Forrest Gump, if you watch it, Forrest Gump he makes a comment about, "I'm sorry I broke up your Black Panther Party." But when people think of the Black Panthers, they often think of these sort of aggressive, assertive, black leather jacket wearing, beret toting, like these guys in this picture, Black Panthers. And this is absolutely one of the images that represents who they were. The Black Panthers, however, were not the only organization that were sort of more aggressive and more sort of had these more aggressive images. Also, organizations like SNCC, SNCC, it actually originally stood for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee comes out of the nonviolent model that began in the late 1950s. But by the early to mid-1960s, SNCC actually had transformed into being an organization that was much more aggressive, much more assertive, much more focused on direct action and sort of the Malcolm X by any means necessary kind of model. And as we talked about in the last lecture, these ideas of black nationalism as started by the Nation of Islam and as spoken about very eloquently by people like Malcolm X are also, for some people, part of their belief in where this movement was going. Because the question is, where is this movement heading? If whites won't give us our rights, then we need to take them. That sort of in that Thoreau idea that you don't have to wait for a government. In fact, you should not wait for a government to give you your rights. That it is your job as a citizen to take those rights if you are acting based on a moral injustice. And of course, the Black Panthers, SNCC, the Nation of Islam, believed themselves to be acting against an immoral system. And it's hard to argue that the system wasn't immoral. If you go back just a few lectures and you look at some of those images of men being lynched and the KKK being sworn into office by, American presidents, and, even just the Justice Department not being willing to prosecute some of these violent behaviors, it's hard to deny that these things were happening. But the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, which is their full name, also wanted to address not just what was going on in the South, but also issues that were going on all over America. So as we take a look at this next slide and we look at the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, they become an organization actually started in Oakland, California, so Northern California. And they are responding specifically to the violence that is being used against African American communities, and specifically their communities in Oakland, California. Not by general white people, not by the white public in general, but specifically by the police. The Oakland Police Department, as with almost all police departments in the United States, was overwhelmingly and in some cases exclusively white. I was just talking to Mr. Vorlander, our sub that works in our building And he was saying that as a person who worked in the fire department in Madison for many, many years. In the 1960s, it was absolutely known, although it wasn't official policy, it was absolutely known that black people could not get elected or could not get hired in the police department or the fire department. And this is how it was all over the United States. That while Madison, by the mid-1960s, may have desegregated drinking fountains and desegregated public pools, the powerful positions of police officers and people policing the communities were exclusively dominated by white men. And in places like Oakland, California, the violence that the police consistently used against the black community was the thing that the Black Panthers were really out to speak against. The founders of the Black Panthers are pictured here on this screen, and you see Bobby Seale on the left, and then a man named Fred Hampton, and Fred Hampton's name is not on your page, but that's his name, and then Huey Newton. And in 1966, these young men, and again, you see young people. These are men in their early 20s. Huey Newton was a little bit older. He was a law student in his mid-20s. They come up with a 10-point plan. Now, the Black Panthers are often portrayed as these violent, aggressive men, and there were violent acts that they were proponents of. But what we often don't see or don't look at are the other purposes of the Black Panthers. I mean, the Black Panthers, to be fair, said, you know, if it means carrying a gun in order for me to defend my people, then you bet I'm going to carry a gun. And they told black people, carry a gun, do it. They marched in neighborhoods with rifles and guns in public view to send a message to the police that they would defend their communities if needed. And they were doing it because they believed that the violence had reached such a level that they had every right and the duty to actually defend their people. And it's part of that dignity, too. I think especially for young black men, seeing their families being abused and the people in their community mistreated, to sort of take back their power. And again, it becomes part of this power movement. But they believed that the government needed to essentially pay back African Americans by providing certain housing benefits, certain food subsidies and food benefits, educational benefits. And they also believed, remember, this is the mid-60s. The Vietnam War is starting to ramp up here, and the draft is going into effect. And they said black men should not have to serve this government. Because the government was so abusive to them, they should be exempt. One of the things, and I'm going to show you in the next slide, is something that a lot of people don't know about the Black Panthers, is that they also had a lot of other programming. If you look at this, this is a flyer, a newspaper flyer that came out that the Black Panthers used, and it talks about voting registration. The Black Panthers were also the first organization in the United States to organize school breakfast programs for poor kids. So they believed in helping, you know, underprivileged children. So there were a lot more things to the Black Panthers than just walking around with guns. The tragedy of the Black Panthers, in many ways, is that they were seen as such a threat because of this aggressive, assertive nature. And, you know, the racist notions that, you know, assertive black men were a danger. J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and into the 1970s, this man had enormous amounts of power. And you see a picture of him here. J. Edgar Hoover was an outspoken racist, plain and simple. And he saw the Black Panthers as such a danger that he, in fact, organized a program to put FBI agents into the Black Panthers, to infiltrate the Black Panthers, and to essentially set them up. These FBI agents were to start selling drugs within the organization, to start running guns within the organization, and very quickly these FBI agents corrupted the Black Panther Party, and it became infested with drug dealing, with gun running. And so this organization that had once really had these high ideals of helping the poor, of defending their people, did in fact devolve into a pretty corrupt organization. But the tragedy of it is that it was corrupted from within by the federal government at the direction of an incredibly racist FBI director. So a pretty horrible circumstance. Now, the Black Panthers do still exist today, and they are still an organization. But again, people's understandings and ideas about the Black Panthers are really very different than their original intention. The picture you're looking at now is a picture from the 1968 Olympics in Mexico, and you see these two, the gold and bronze medalists in track and field, very, very publicly raising a fist. Look at these black-gloved fists. This symbol of the black-gloved fist was a symbol of the Black Power movement, and these men were making a statement of this was during the national anthem. They bowed their heads and raised their fists to say that this country, this idea of a free nation is not doing what it says it's going to do. We don't hold to our ideals that are within our national anthem, and it's a particularly poignant moment, because these are the Summer Olympics of '68. And in April of '68, the United States was reeling from the assassination of Martin Luther King, which we'll talk about in a couple of lectures. But, you know, there were other components of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and one of them had to do with Black pride. The photograph you're looking at right here is of a man named James Brown, who was a very famous African-American singer, sang funk, and within American music, songs like "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" started emerging, and these messages of, you know, blacks being proud of who they are, of sort of taking their identities and no longer just sort of going along with this sort of white story of who they are and how they should behave. And also along with that are women and men, but women in particular, taking back their beauty images. The afro emerges by the late 1960s and into the 1970s as black women start rejecting these images of, you know, straight Anglo hair and saying, you know, why can't we have natural curly black hair and have that also represent beauty and represent beauty images? And so these are all components to the Black Power movement that are dominant in the 1960s and then into the 1970s. Interestingly enough, however, as much as we have come a really long way in terms of civil rights, one area that I think it's interesting to look at is this idea of the sort of beauty image for African Americans. On the slide that I'm showing you right here, you see Beyonce and Oprah Winfrey. Compare that to the Black Power image of the woman with the afro. You know, Beyonce and Oprah don't achieve their looks by, you know, they don't wake up in the morning with hair like this. This hair, which is styled straight and long, is not naturally how their hair looks. These are chemical relaxers that are used to make their hair look like this. In the next slide, you can see this is what Beyonce and Oprah's hair looks more naturally like. And what some people have said time and time again is that, you know, even in the modern era, we still struggle with these ideas of, you know, black pride and, you know, beauty being just sort of one example of how sometimes images and ideas of being black can be shaped for women and for men. I'm going to post on the webpage the trailer for a documentary film that was made by Chris Rock recently about this very issue, about why is it that modern black Americans, after all that we've gone through, all that we've achieved, he says, why do we still hold to these ideas about beauty? And why do my daughters ask me, Daddy, why don't I have good hair? Because they perceive themselves as little black girls with curly hair to not have good hair. But what does good hair mean? It means hair maybe more like mine, straight, European Anglo. Well, so that's the bell. So I think that is enough on this topic for now. Okay, thank you.